What is the craziest real-life plot twist story you have? Story 1. The husband of an elderly couple near me died about a year ago. The wife for most of her adult life had a pretty serious drinking habit, and her husband kept her on track. A month or two after his death, she found someone new off the internet. He quickly moved in, but something wasn't right about him. He'd often be seen buying multiple bottles of vodka and whiskey and taking them home with him. He was doing this every 1 to 2 days. Anyway, soon after, the police came asking people in the local area to see if anyone had seen the elderly woman and her new partner, as they believed they had recently got married. This could be because if she was to die, her nice house would be left to him now. He kept buying alcohol for presumably her, until 2 police vans, an ambulance and crime scene investigators were seen outside the house. No one has been seen in or around the house since. At first I thought he was trying to kill this poor woman off through her drinking habit, but got fed up and tried to murder her so he could have the house. But according to neighbors, she killed him to stop the apparent abuse he'd been putting her through. She is apparently in a secure unit now, where she will most likely stay. Story 2. First roommate in college was super Catholic and did not approve of my older Beth. As an attempt to save me, she thought of inviting me to her friend's celibacy celebration while I was doing homework in the Commons. A chill wind picked up, and I sensed it was time for me to leave. As I turned around, I saw the only doorway blocked by a circle of people holding hands and quietly chanting "No sex until 30, no sex until 30." As I approached to try to break through the circle, and kafo, their chanting got louder. I eventually got out, but this chick threw away all of my high-end sex toys and Suicide Girl book. I was done with living with her and got out after just a quarter. Over a year later, a few friends and I were comparing horror stories about roommates we have had, and I shared my story. A new friend told hers about a super noisily jay-offing lesbian. None of the others had much to say, so they voted between the two. Mine won by a small margin, only to find out both of our stories were about the same roommate, just 1 year apart. Oh, also, she did not throw out my sex toys or my Suicide Girl book. Story 3. I was best friends with a neighbor kid growing up. He was always over at my house or I was at his, and I had a major crush on him pretty much since I was old enough to walk. But it never seemed like he liked me back, or that he even noticed that I liked him, so we grew up. He started dating people, and I was jealous as F over it. I started dating people while still pining over him. I figure he just sees me as a little kid. I was a year younger than him, or a little sister, and nothing will ever come out of it, so I try to put my feelings aside. Then when he turned 16, his family moved out of state, and we lost contact. I got over my feelings and time moved on. Fast forward a few years later, and we reconnect online, start talking, and then this dude casually mentions in a conversation about how he had a giant crush on me growing up and always wanted to ask me out. He tells me that he even asked my mother for permission to ask me out, and she said no, so he never ended up doing it. My mom never told me about this at all. My mind is blown. My entire childhood of pining after this guy, my first ever crush, feels like a lie. At this point, I'd long since put aside the feelings I had for him and kinda gotten over the crush, but I still felt a lot of residual nostalgia from being 15 and craving D for the first time in my life. He was still into me, and I was debating whether I wanted to start something with him or not, mostly so I wouldn't have to live with the what if of it all, tossing the idea around while we kept in touch. Then suddenly he stops messaging me. I'm like, because our talking was going well, and I didn't think I did anything to make him want to start ghosting me. I message a mutual friend of ours and ask if she knows what's up, and she tells me the guy was arrested for beating a dude who owed him money to death. He's in prison right now serving a life sentence. I never got that D. The end. Story 4. I used to have a friend named Tiffany in middle school. I wasn't so good with people, and I was a little rough around the edges. I was very jealous because she was incredibly dainty and feminine while I was a begrudging tomboy. In middle school, Her very sketchy and violent father withdrew her from classes, and we lost contact. She was homeschooled for a while, and then she and her mother escaped to a battered women's shelter and set up a new life in Kentucky. I learned all this from the grapevine. I found her mother, brothers, aunts, and uncles on Facebook, so why couldn't I find her? Over the course of 2 years, I searched every few months for her online, desperate to reconnect and apologize to the friend I had such intense jealousy for, and explain that I was unintentionally rude because I envied how feminine she was, while I felt like a brick wall of a girl. Finally, one day, her mother replied to my friend request, and I found out the reason that I never could find her name on Facebook. He goes by TJ now. Story 5. I've grown up hearing about my Cherokee ancestry from my dad's side of the very southern family. One of my cousins has gone on a spirit journey and has spent a good amount of time researching his Cherokee heritage and connecting to our familial roots. The 2-minute version of the family story tells how a patriarch of my family met the woman of his dreams and moved out into the forest to live like a true Cherokee father would. He left the rest of our family behind. Several years ago, my grandma got very into Ancestry.com. As they researched our tree, they found that we actually have no Cherokee blood. However, my great-great-great-grandma was a black woman. I think that's enough great. It makes me so happy to think about my racist uncles and extended family finding out that we are 0% Cherokee and that my generation is 1/16 black. The further you go up my family line, and the more racist my family, the more black we are. I love it. Story 6. Used to play an online browser game back in 2003 to 2006-ish. The game itself wasn't really great, but the community was what made it work. Got to know a lot of people from my guild, and we had an IRC channel that I was one of the main regulars on. Another regular, there was a guy from a different country, though also in the EU. We became kind of good online friends, but after we stopped playing the game, contact became increasingly scarce before petering out completely at some point. By then we did have Facebook and friends, but we never actually talked. 2 years ago, in a nostalgic moment, I decided to hit some people up again from that game. See if we can have some sort of reunion or something, maybe. I send a message to the guy, and our conversation went something like this. Me. Hey man, long time no talk. What's up in your life these days? Him. Oh hey, I live in your country now lol, with my girlfriend I met online. Me. That's funny. Whereabouts? Him. Less than town that's literally 10 minutes driving away from me greater than. We talk some more, and the subject of work comes up. He then tells me he works in a different city about 20 minutes further. The city he names is where I was born and where my mother works. I ask him where exactly, and the place he names is right across the canal from my mother's business. Literally a stone's throw away. Funnily enough, I still haven't met him because we fell out of contact again, right after that due to other things going on in our lives, but we plan on meeting up sometime soon. Story 7. My dad was adopted as a baby because his parents were both teens from Catholic families. They were promptly sent to boarding schools across the country from each other, and that was that. Many years later, my dad was researching his genetics to look for potential hereditary health problems and decided to put out a search for his parents. He eventually contacted and met with them separately, but both his mom and dad also got in contact with each other. As it turns out, they both had grown kids and deceased spouses, so they decided to meet up and eventually started dating. About 5 years ago, my brother and I went with my dad to a family reunion, where we discovered his parents were once again in love and had invited both of their families to my grandpa's farm for a big weekend party. I met close to 100 people I was somehow related to, including dozens of cousins and several aunts and uncles. It was all thanks to my dad that these two huge families came together and made new connections, so he, along with my brother, and I were treated like celebrities all weekend, and everyone wanted to get to know us. My dad's adoptive mother died over a year ago, but now he has two new parents who are relatively young and extremely interesting people for him and my family to spend time with. We go skiing at my grandpa's condo in Montana and enjoy summer activities at his huge farm property in Alberta. The whole experience taught me that you're never too old for a new love, and I am happy to be able to have grandparents for many more years to come. Story 8. My boyfriend of 2 years broke up with me, and I was pretty upset, but I got asked out on a date and said yes, thinking I was ready. I was wrong. I had a miserable time. Couldn't hit it off with this guy, even though he was trying. Anyway, he took me to a concert on the other side of the city, an area I'm not familiar with and never go to. On the way home, I'm feeling sad and text my ex, which was lame, but I did it. My date thinks something is wrong with one of his back tires and pulls over into an apartment complex. It's 1 a.m., dark, and I take little notice. While he's outside fiddling with the tire, I get a text back from my ex basically telling me he wished he had never met me and to leave him alone. At this point, I'm trying not to cry and realize how big of a mistake it was to go out that night, and in general just feeling depressed AF, thinking I'll never be happy again. I tell the date guy I'm sorry, but I'm not ready to be in a relationship again. The night ends. Cut to 2 months later, I finally feel like I'm moving on and try online dating. I hit it off with a guy I'm talking to. We met up and had a great time and started dating. The first time he brings me back to his place, it's nighttime. I'm looking around the outside of the apartment complex and can't shake the familiar feeling I had been there before, which didn't make sense because this was 45 minutes from where I lived and not an area I ever went to. On the second night, we leave using the back gate, and it hits me. This was the same apartment complex the guy had pulled off into earlier on that date. I go, oh my God. I almost had an emotional breakdown right here. Long story short, I married the new guy, and we have been together 10 years now. I know it's just a coincidence, but I find it crazy that of all the apartments in Houston, we stopped at the one my future husband lived at. He was literally feet away from me, while I was in a car having one of the lowest moments in my life, and feeling like I would never find someone again. Story 9. My maternal grandfather's father was an immigrant. His mother divorced his father while my grandfather was very young, remarried, and had grandpa get adopted by her new husband. He was always referred to as a stepfather because he was a drunk, and grandpa hated him. Mom grew up hearing that her biological grandfather was French, and her grandmother divorced him after he bought a dress for another woman. And she was so angry with him, she even refused to admit they'd ever been married, so he got deported back to Europe. When Mom was in high school, her grandmother let it slip that her biological grandfather wasn't French at all. He was Italian. The Italians were on the wrong side of WW2, so Grandpa lied to avoid facing more prejudice than he already did for being raised by a single mother and having an immigrant father. This was actually a valid concern. Grandma told Mom she'd never have married Grandpa if she'd known he was Italian. When I was a small child, the story was that my great-grandfather was Italian. He'd bought a dress for another woman, and my pissed-off great-grandma divorced him and had him deported. My mom's a genealogy fanatic, so she made some attempts to get records from the Italian government, but didn't really find anything. Even when we went and visited Italy after my best friend moved there when I was in the 7th grade, a few years later, we found out why. My biological great-grandfather was never deported. He'd moved to Detroit, gotten remarried to a woman with almost the same name as my great-grandmother, and had a son. Grandpa, who was in his 80s, found out that he has a half-brother he'd never known about. Not only that, but his biological father might never have bought a dress for another woman. There's an alternate story where he used to joke that he and my great-grandmother weren't really married because they'd never had a Catholic ceremony. She was Baptist, he was Catholic. Great-grandma got mad, threatened to divorce him if he did it again, then did. And as it turns out, They may not have been legally divorced. My great-grandma allegedly paid her uncle, who was a judge, to divorce them, because my great-grandfather didn't want to get divorced. But there's no record of them being divorced, and apparently my great-grandfather had a very hard time getting remarried. Now the fact that my great-grandmother had to go on a trip to get married makes a lot more sense. My great-grandfather also tried to stay in contact with my grandpa and provide for him, but my great-grandmother wouldn't let him. None of her relatives were even allowed to mention my great-grandfather and were afraid to talk about him until after she died, so we believe that's true. We've met my great-uncle. He is frighteningly similar to my grandfather in some ways that can only be explained by genetics. They both laugh the same way, do this weird side hug thing where they pull you in really tightly, and like to clasp both your hands when they talk to you about anything involving feelings. He has the same eyes as my mom, and likes sports and genealogy like her too. It's pretty cool, and I wish we'd found out about him sooner. Story 10. We were at a college fundraising event, and our friend Dom was desperately and obnoxiously hitting on any female in sight during that time, including me. But anyways, there was one girl in a hat who started hanging by our group's table to prevent Dom from coming on strong on Hat Girl, and so she didn't feel uncomfortable by Dom. My friend told him she was gay. Dom left her alone. Fast forward a few days and friends, including Dom, are sitting at lunch when Hat Girl comes and starts talking to one of the girls at our table, and somewhere along the lines Hat Girl said to female friend, "Stop it, you know I'm gay." We had no idea she was actually gay, so we were dying when that happened.